right. All right. So we are live. All right. So it is Tuesday at 8:01. So somebody tried to come for me and say that I was going to be at 8:03 sharp, but we hit 8:01 some beforehand. So forget you. Anyway, today we got a really interesting conversation. I'm really, really excited to have these people on. I've actually been watching. Some of them don't even realize that I've actually been kind of watching them the whole time. For various reasons, because education has always been something that's been special to me. If some of you do not know, I got an interest in politics from working for freedom schools in Washington, D.C. I was teaching at a charter school, which was a detention center, and I kind of fell into education in that way. Did some CPS and in their arts department, and just kind of fell in love with education. So education has always been a huge love of mine. Being in the classroom is a very difficult place to be in. Unfortunately, I kind of was in a classroom in a detention center where I was teaching math. So I kind of got the worst of it, seeing some of the heavier and rougher sides of education. But education. So I want to kind of talk about education because we are in a time right now where we're having conversations about going back to school, and I was having this conversation about going back to school, and a lot of people are nervous about this. Parents are having discussions about it. It's kind of been politicized. Anytime you talk about the economy, it's going to be politicized because people want to open up the economy. People want to see money flowing. When you stop the economy, you stop money, you stop the powers that kind of control the world, especially in a capitalist society. So I brought on these guests. The last time I had a conversation about education, it was a lot of women, which is good. But I wanted to kind of showcase males in the space too, because we have a lot of great Black men that are in the education space. And I also want to showcase a father. We have a lot of great fathers in this world. One of which I happen to work with. He's a great guy. And so he has kids too. But I found out too that our teacher also has 4 boys. God, I mean, one day when I grow up, I'm gonna have kids too. That's definitely my goal. How that happens is still up in the air, but yeah, definitely will have children. I think it's the best job in the world to have. That's really what we're here for, is to reproduce technically. So anyway, ranting. So let me go ahead and introduce these great people. I'm excited to have them. So the first person that I'm going to introduce is Sterling Grimes. Okay. So Sterling is currently serving as the cohort director for the Summer House Institute, a nonprofit organization providing Black male undergraduates with pre-service exposure to the field of education. He is a career educator with more than a decade of experience working with middle and high school students. During that time, he spent 8 years teaching English in Philadelphia, becoming a teacher leader responsible for developing and facilitating professional development sessions on instruction, as well as diversity and equity. After leaving the classroom, he entered the nonprofit sector to serve as Chief Program Officer for the Fellowship BMEC, Inc. In this role, he supported the recruitment, retention, and development of highly effective Black male educators across the country. He also stays connected to his former school as an advisor to the upper school's mentorship and leadership development program. Since 2010, he has also worked with Maryland Leadership Workshops, providing leadership training to middle and high school students. Sterling holds a bachelor's degree in government and politics from the University of Maryland College Park and an MSED in urban education from the University of Pennsylvania. He is a proud uncle and an active member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity, Inc., and focusing on education, scholarship, and social action initiatives. All right. The second person I have on tonight is Ismael Jimenez. He is a dedicated educator who for the last 14 years has worked with students in Philadelphia from preschool age to high school. Along with teaching at the high school level, Ismael has facilitated several professional developments with colleagues in the school district and at post-secondary institutions like University of Pennsylvania, Penn State University, and Princeton University on issues ranging from structural racism to bridging the knowledge gap of students between high school and post-secondary institutions. Also, he has taught a graduate educational research course at Villanova University, an undergraduate social studies methods course at LaSalle University, And currently, Ismael is co-chair of the Caucus of Working Educators. I will say that the Working Educators was the only organization that endorsed me when I was running for office. So they're very close to my heart. They are a great organization. I'm sorry, I digressed. So for the Working Educators, co-founder of the Philly Hub for Liberatory Academics, Philadelphia Black History Collaborative, and Melanated Educators Collective, while being an active participant in several other organizations that seek racial justice in education and across the city of Philadelphia. The philosophical orientation that guides Ismael's teaching and activism is rooted in the theoretical educational framework developed by Paulo Freire, which emphasizes the interconnected nature of education with participating in transformation of the world. And the last person, but not least, is Papa Kobina Dickson. I call him PK. And he is currently a legal advocate in housing rights at the Senior Law Center. He works with the tenant rights and homeownership rights teams. He has degrees in English and law from Ghana, his native country. PK also has a paralegal certificate from Villanova University, College of Professional Studies. Before joining the Senior Law, he was a broadcast journalist in Ghana. Some of the highlights of his career was when he reported on the 7th General Assembly of the United Nations in New York City in 2015. Between 2015 and 2016, he participated in media activities organized by the Foreign Press Centers of New York and Washington, D.C. Some of these activities exposed him to major U.S. news sources, including the U.S. State Department and White House. PK's passion for public interest law developed when he served as a volunteer at Senior Law Center, and he's a notary public in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. That's a lot, but these people are great, and that I gave them justice. So I'm introducing everybody on screen. How are you all doing? And thank you so much for taking the time out to talk to me about education. All right. So one of the things that I wanted to read to you guys before I started jumping into the conversation is this. So I was doing a lot of research on education, and I was just like, a lot of people are just kind of not wanting to send their children to school. But when I read the reasoning why, it was kind of moving to me, considering the types of things that I tend to advocate for when I'm out there. And so this is what they said. It said, with the above principles in mind, the American Academy of Pediatricians strongly advocates that all policy considerations for the coming school year should start with the goal of having students physically present in school. The importance of in-person learning is well documented. There's already evidence of the negative impacts on children because of school closures in the spring of 2020. Lifting time away from school and associated interruption of supportive services often results in social isolation, making it difficult for schools to identify and address important learning deficits, as well as child and adolescent physical or sexual abuse, substance use, depression, and suicidal ideation. This in turn places children and adolescents at considerable risk of morbidity, and in some cases, mortality. Beyond the educational impact and social impact of school closures, there has been substantial impact on food security and physical activity for children and families. So considering these things, it seems like it is the best thing for children to go back into the classroom. Considering that not only do we have technology problems, but we would also have educational equity problems, right? Where you have teachers trying to figure out how to teach children online. And that within itself is a lot of work to do. So I'll go ahead and toss this at Ismael, and then we'll go to Sterling, and then we'll talk to PK about this. Right? So what are your feelings about what I just read, Ismael? I mean, considering that, I know that you've been an advocate, you care about people and children. How do you feel about what the American Academy of Pediatricians is saying?
Well, I started off as a parent at first, right? So I have 4 boys right now, right? And my youngest is starting kindergarten next year. So that means I have a kindergartner, a 4th grader, a 6th grader, and an 8th grader, right? And if I'm tasked to teach virtually myself, that becomes problematic for myself. And the issues of health and everything like that, I'm not negating. It just becomes a more complicated, like nuanced issue that doesn't have an easy solution, because each solution is somewhat problematic when it comes to basically how we live our lives, right? So like my wife is with me, but she has to work. You know what I mean? She's at a homeless shelter working with folks. So like she's at work all day, and I'm supposed to hold down the fort at the crib, at the house, you know, not only teaching my own students, but making sure my children stay on track. Um, so I can tell you right now, for the most part, teachers are steadfast against it. There are folks that want to go back, but there's also acknowledgement that we're not over kind of like the hump or whatever is happening, right?
Mhm.
Um, so I think whatever happens, I don't think nobody's going to be happy. I pray and I hope that these issues get ironed out faster than later, you know, than later. But regardless of the circumstances, this is unique and it's unprecedented, and we just have to adjust and accommodate based on the shift of the weather.
Mhm.
And there's no other aspect besides that, you know, and it's unfortunate because children will suffer because remote learning, online learning does not produce the same type of relationships and the same type of social circumstances that students need, that children need in school. Um, and at home, especially with parents working, it becomes a whole nother question.
Yeah, I hear you. What do you think, Sterling?
Yes, but first, Alex, good evening, gentlemen. Thank you for bringing me
Hey,
on. I appreciate you inviting me into the space.
my pleasure.
I would first enthusiastically retweet everything that Ishmael just said, even down to like quite literally, nobody's going to be happy. If that's not the story of America, then I don't know what is. And so I think when I hear the Academy make this comment that students totally like learn better in person, I 100% agree with that. I speak as a classroom educator who knows kids absolutely benefit from the academic space, the social space, the emotional space, and the community that a school is able to provide when it does its job right. But the Academy assuming that students should go back to school assumes a number of things that are not in place, particularly when we talk about marginalized communities that tend to serve Black and brown students. And so if we are really going to be appropriately addressing this challenge of coming back to school and restarting the economy, and quite honestly, taking this responsibility off of schools, which is what's really happening right now, we have to really be thinking about balance and equity. And these are pieces that the Academy and all kinds of academies are consistently not thinking about when it comes to safely reopening and managing the next phase of what COVID-19 is going to bring to our nation. And so if we're really going to do this well, we've got to talk about things like funding. Where is the funding to ensure that students and staff in schools are adequately protected, have the resources and materials that they need to appropriately be together in spaces? How are we ensuring safety in a way that we have not done before? I mean, Ishmael's making the comment now in our chat, many schools weren't safe beforehand. We already knew that there was quite literal danger for some students walking into schools. We cannot add on to that this health risk and continue to talk about comorbidities that exist as if we are not actively funneling ourselves into them and funneling our students into them by just saying like, everybody get back in the classroom. And so success in this case, I think, totally recognizes that we are going to have to continue to be flexible. The district is presenting its plan to the Board of Education for approval on Thursday, I believe. And we're going to have to continue to remain willing to see what happens as the disease progresses. We're seeing a number of states pull back on their reopening plans because of new cases that are spiking over the last couple of days. We're going to need to have grace and understanding for the fact that this is going to be frustrating on all fronts. And no one is going to walk away, again, completely happy with the situation. But if we can make the space for one another and recognize that this really is about community, community health, community support, and community strength, then we can get through this phase to ultimately get to a better place on the other side. And the last point I think I would put here is that we're going to have to be willing to reimagine, and that's been the buzzword for a while now, I think, but really reimagine the way that systems approach our work of schooling and education. We're going to need to accept different modalities, recognizing that there are a number of educators who are phenomenal at their job, but they are also parents, they are also caretakers, they're also community members, and those responsibilities have to be held in this balance with students. And recognizing that students themselves are balancing a number of responsibilities at home that we can't just set aside and say, like, show up on whatever day we say you need to. So if we're going to do this the right way, which I think is coming with a number of asterisks and provisions and exceptions, it's going to really require us to recognize that there is not going to be a one-size-fits-all approach to us being successful for students and for the staff members that come into schools every day.
So, Vic, PK. PK, so you are a father. What are the ages of your kids?
So I have a 10-year-old, I have a 2-year-old, and I recently just, we just had a girl. So
Yeah,
yeah, I'm just going to start by saying this.
I was asking you that because I want to kind of change the question around for you. I sent all of you guys an article that was a study that happened in Korea, right? Where we were talking about how younger children don't transmit the disease as much as kids who are teenagers. So they're saying that teenagers tend to transmit the disease way more often than younger kids do. So I think when you're having this conversation about re-entry into the schools, I think you have to have a different discussion when you're talking about high school students and elementary school students, right? And the conversation happens around how do you keep them engaged with technology? How do you make sure they're still safe? You know, with parents having young kids like PK who still has to work on a regular basis. PK, after hearing that, 9 times out of 10, your kids aren't going to be the main ones transferring, or your kids aren't necessarily as, or you aren't as susceptible as getting the disease from your children from going to school. Does that make you feel a little bit more comfortable with sending your young children to school? And how does this conversation and the way that these teachers and former educators are discussing it, how does it make you feel about you sending your young children to school? Go ahead.
So first of all, Alex, I'm just going to say this. We're in a pandemic, right? Anything at all can happen. So regardless of who can transmit the most diseases, I'm not looking at that. Okay, and I'm going to also retweet what the thoughts of both Sterling and Ishmael. And I'm just going to add this, that everything is okay with what you read out. You know, in the ideal situation, that's what you want to have. But in this case, we're going to have to adapt, and we're going to have to make so many adjustments, especially like Sterling was trying to say. I definitely do not feel safe for my 10-year-old to go back to school, or even my 2-year-old to go back to the daycare. Even if Alex is trying to convince me that teenagers are more prone to spreading the disease, no, I'm not going to listen to that. Simply put, I just don't feel comfortable. I feel that it's about time that we I don't, for lack of a better expression, work with the times. I feel that technology does everything these days. Instead of trying to put them in this kind of situation, why don't you just stick with technology and make it work? It's working so far, I think. Definitely, it's not going to be the same as conventional schooling or conventional education. But if you ask me, my preference would be that they sit this one out and just deal with technology. It's totally not safe, and I'm speaking because I have a newborn. I don't want to risk any tragedy. Knock on wood.
So you're saying you're fearful for the baby. We don't know what the effects are on children that are babies and what effect it's going to have on them as they get older with this virus. And so I definitely do hear that. My next question for you guys is, and I guess I'll take it back to PK. The superintendent of Philadelphia schools laid out. Said that that we hold on because I have it here. He laid out a list of rules, best practices for the city of Philadelphia, saying that they're going to do like a sort of a halftime type entry type for students, right? Mm-hmm. And that they're going to require that the schools be cleaned every 4 hours. And so we're saying that the kids are not going to be there full time. They're going to be going into the buildings part time, and that this place is going to be cleaned every 4 hours. By who, I don't know. I'm assuming that it's going to be something extra that the teachers are going to have to do. But make sure it's sanitized. Would this be a better situation for you, or would this make you a little bit more comfortable with sending your kids to school for less than part of the time, and knowing that they're going to be cleaning the school on a regular basis? Does this make you feel more comfortable as a parent sending your kids to school? And so I'll start with PK. I'll send it back to you, Ishmael, and then we'll drop it down to you, Sterling. Okay? Does that make you feel more comfortable if they're creating and adding more standards?
I don't know if my thoughts are going to sound very one way to you, Alex, and
No, it's okay.
our viewers, because I feel that I'm it's difficult for anybody to convince me that this is the right thing to do at this moment. Instead of spending that much resource on these, cleanliness and trying to make sure that everything is kept in a way that everybody else will be safe. Why don't you do that? Do the same with technology. Try to fix whatever challenges there are and try to keep them as isolated as possibly as you can. But I honestly don't listen. So I was reading this article, or rather, I was listening to NPR, I think, this afternoon, and I heard that the decision or the meeting that was held by the powers that be to look into reopening of these schools was held virtually. So I'm saying that if it's that safe for these children to get back to school and to get back to their regular schedules, why are you holding these meetings in a virtual world instead of in person? You know what I mean? So my argument definitely is still going to support the fact that technology should be harnessed in these times that we're in to its maximum potential. And definitely there are challenges, as Sterling said. Try to, put the same resources that you're looking to put into school reopening, into tweaking technology to make it work for everybody else. I definitely do not go with the idea of letting these kids go back into the classroom, even if they are 10-year-olds or 13-year-olds. I don't think so.
So Ishmael, I mean, I'm going to toss it back to you. He's saying that the school shouldn't be spending all this money on resources, right? You are now. Are you a part of the teachers union for Philadelphia Public Schools?
Yes, I am.
Okay, and so I noticed that in Camden, I think it was in Cherry Hill, they were saying that it was going to take $23 million. No, $2.5 million to be able to buy masks, just masks, for the whole year for all the students and the teachers. That's a huge portion of their budget, right? And teachers already don't get paid that much, as you know, right? I mean, so how do you feel? And then too, if the schools decide to pivot towards focusing on technology, that means that they don't have to worry about bloated classrooms. You can have as many children as you, if teachers become very good at harnessing technology to teach their students, you're going to realize that, or capitalism is going to show us that we don't need that many teachers. I mean, and they always cut the education budget as it is in the first place. So if they can find it to be cheaper to invest in technology and better practices using technology and having less teachers in the classroom, how does that really affect you? So does that kind of influence your thoughts about going back to the school, or how does that make you feel?
Well, just being very honest, the technology piece has always been, to me, an existential, long-term threat down the road towards in-person teaching. Of course, the wealthy and the rich can afford to probably send their kids to private schools and in-person instruction. But yeah, I can see to down profit, to downsize, and to maximize short-term profits moving towards that model. I'm hoping that this experience with remote learning has shown us how problematic it actually is. I lost a lot of students at the end of the year. And I can tell you right now, the work level or lack up there, I mean, there was none. And I don't envision that changing in the future. If anything, I envision, regardless of how many staff folds we put in place through virtual or how much money they put towards software programs that evaluate on demand and assess their ability to do a certain thing or whatever, I think at the end of the day, we're going to end up seeing the same results produced. Because the dirty secret about education at the end of the day is about social economics. There's a reason why we have racially and socially economic segregated schools heavily within this society right now, if not more than it's ever been. But the difference today than it was before the civil rights movement is that we don't have a Black, established, educated type of school situation where it's run by the community. We have a situation where we have a lot of folks being educated with folks who don't know the story or the history or the context in which they're even teaching it. I mean, like in Philadelphia, the average life expectancy of a teacher in the district is 3 to 5 years.
Oh, wow.
15 years ago, it was almost 20. So, like, when we talk about the shirt difference, like, I couldn't even start teaching for real, until I was like my 5th, 6th year. Like, not in the sense of like being reflective and really like perfecting the practice. So, if we're saying that most people don't even make it to that point, then what are we putting in front of our students? We're experimenting with them, right? So yes, I agree to the point of throwing money and resources simply at a system that is, I would say, functioning the way it's supposed to, but at the same time, for the community it served, is dysfunctional. That we have to think how we even think about school and education, because schooling and education are two separate things, and our kids, intelligent and bright and smart and genius as they are, peak game. They know they only, like the smartest ones know they only have to check off a couple boxes. The smartest ones know that the system's designed in a sense to only prop up anomalies. So I'm sorry to get all preachy with it.
No.
And go a little off subject. But like when we're even talking about opening up schools, right, we know what the priority is. And the priority is not to really fully, truly educate the majority of people in America in a critical way. I mean, there really never has been a desire to do that. Why do you think school districts are funded locally, right? And then we can point to magnets and we can point to like charters that do well, right? But all that does is siphon off of like a collective responsibility where we shouldn't have any failing schools. And then talking about how we get our kids out shouldn't be part of that conversation. And I know that's idealistic and naive sounding, but at the end of the day, where does that leave us?
Well, you know, my thing is this. I mean, like, I think that they are complaining about a lot of socioeconomic issues that are happening that they expect the teachers in the school district to supply. I mean, we recognize that when you live in a very depressed communities, that they start to segregate on their own. I mean, like, we recognize that when their communities are poor, they go back to their families and they start to segregate on their own. That's why they say that Philadelphia is highly segregated. It's a very, very poor city. And so people go into their own communities and they tend to segregate by themselves. And so, like, I see that you are addressing some of the socioeconomic issues and some of the poverty issues that are affecting the students, that are causing them not to be able to focus because school is an escape for them. But like, maybe this is a good thing that's happening because it will probably force social services to actually do the job, or force governments to invest in social services that they've been using the teachers in the school to supply. You also brought up a good point of teachers only staying in the classroom for maybe 2 to 3 years. Am I correct? And so why do you think that is? Because Sterling, you left the classroom, right? What do you think it was that navigated you out of the classroom into the type of advocacy work that you do to try to balance the playing field? And let me say this too, please like, comment, and share. If you are watching me on YouTube, you can go ahead and subscribe on J8390 so that you can get the updates whenever we do these live chats. And also make sure you stay on to the end so you can get these people's information, so that you are more than welcome to reach out to them and contact them and follow the work that they do. They all do great work. Also do realize that I'm just questioning people, so a lot of the stuff I'm saying is just challenging them. It's not necessarily something that I believe. All right. So we're going back to you, Sterling. What made you leave out the classroom, man? And how do you think that we fix some of these issues and use this moment as a time to really kind of rethink the way we use education and the way that we rethink poverty and economic inequality?
Yeah, I absolutely loved my time in the classroom. Pickett was my home school, literally my entire career. I spent 4 years in middle school and transitioned to high school and got to see the first students that I ever taught graduate out. A beautiful experience. And for me, education, and particularly classroom education, is absolutely something near and dear to me and that I would love to go back to. So I was not run out. I did not have a bad experience that pushed me away. I was simply convinced to take a different route in order to support individuals like myself, Black men in education, who were looking for community support, development, mentorship, things that were not consistent. In the United States, only 2% of all teachers are Black men. And so this is an area that needs a number of different supports to ensure that individuals who we know are doing critical work every day, like Ismael, are able to have the kind of supports they need both in the classroom and surrounding that space for them to stay effective. And so I was really drawn into this space to ensure that we continued leveraging the resources that we know are available to ensure that individuals like myself, like Ismael, are able to do that job well. In terms of this sort of shift in the opportunity that I think it presents, I do agree that there is an opportunity here. And honestly, that rests with those who are holding power in positions around policy, both education and government, to ensure that we are looking at this reimagining in a way that does support social equity. Schools for far too long, and this has been a conversation that's been repeated from coast to coast, have been asked to bear the burden of the middle class economy. Schools have to be education centers and babysitters and nutritionists and psychologists and therapists and coaches and life balancing, all knowing, resourced things when we spend most of our time stripping resources away in different ways. And so I think if we're going to really do this right, we have to, again, go back to sort of that balance question. How are we reinvesting money to ensure that schools receive the kind of supports they need to really be these community strongholds that they ought to be? Because Ismael hit it right on the head. There are districts out there who are funding their schools and funding their students at levels way higher than we see, particularly in urban spaces. And those students are going to figure it out either way. Their families are going to figure it out either way because they have the resources, they have the knowledge, they have the advocacy skills and the connections to ensure that their concerns are going to be heard and that somebody will do something about them. And in our system, that simply is not the case, particularly when we talk about marginalized communities, poor communities, Black and brown communities. And so this is a time for us to call on those leaders who are sitting at the Board of Education, in our superintendent's office, in our city council, in our state legislature, where we know most of the funding formula problem roots, to say this is the time to ensure that we're pulling money and putting it where it needs to be. These systems right now, the hybrid system that's being proposed for the school district with A and B days and all digital learning on Fridays is really us making the best of a bad situation. We know students need to be engaged in a classroom setting in some way because that helps their development. And so we've got to figure out a space to do that. We've also got to manage that with health and safety. And we know that these two things are going to continue to butt heads. And so we are, again, trying to figure out the best way to navigate it while making sure that we are supporting students and families as well as the staff that come in. And I would also recognize that the district has put out an all digital learning academy as an option for parents and families to opt into. And so I would continue to encourage those who are out there considering these decisions and thinking about their students, like advocate for the pieces that you need. We all need to continue banging on the table, shaking that table, flipping that table over and building a new table if need be in certain spaces to ensure that we are developing the right supports for our communities.
Yes, and I like to put this. Let me just put it, clip in this. So before I came on your show, Alex, I was reading on the Lower Merion School District website, and everything that Sterling just said is everything that's on there. They have an option to go virtual, so they've established the virtual academy, so that parents can actually who do not want to go that route could go virtual, and it's everything. If you have a thorough read of it, it's everything that you would wish that every other school would be doing, especially with the school district in Philadelphia. So if you get a chance, I think that it's worth reading on the website of the Lower Merion School District.
Yeah, so then let's take it there, right? Because I think we're starting to get questions from the comments. It's just like a lot of parents are sitting here, and I think that Ismael hit it on the head a little bit. He has 4 boys. Not only does he have 4 boys, he's also trying to teach other children and trying to work a full-time job, right? And I'm sure that's probably, I'm not sure what his spouse is doing, but it's a lot to manage. Can a lot of parents really afford to have their kids home for this long? I mean, I was having a conversation before about COVID, about relationships. And I was talking about what was happening internally for a lot of parents, because I mean, I've always focused on mental health, right? Sometimes we get so swept up in these situations where we're not paying attention to what's happening to us internally, right? As individuals. I'm sure it's even worse sometimes as parents. I mean, I was in a relationship and my relationship imploded on itself because of COVID, because it was forced to move extremely quickly, right? So, you're talking about relationships and dynamics in the home. Some of these parents are probably going through really, really crazy situations, right? And they need the teacher to take the kids away, right? So how do you speak to these parents who are really genuinely struggling? Like, and it's sad that they have to think about, think about putting their kids at risk just to be able to get their own sense of sanity. How do you suggest, and I can start with Ishmael, then go to PK, and then we'll swing back to you, Sterling. How do you suggest parents support their children, but not only support their children, support themselves while they're going through this time of really having to juggle all of these things at one time during a very stressful situation?
I wish I had an easy answer. I can tell you that myself, my own personal experience was like a huge struggle. You know, schools in Philadelphia closed March 13th. That was the last day.
Mm-hmm.
And believe me, I had to go through like trials and tribulations to even like reorient my reality of being home with so many kids. And then at the same time, there was no instruction at first. So like even like printing up sheets and like talking to them about it, while also at the same time maintaining my responsibilities to my students, which I continued regardless of when the district said to begin or not. And with all those factors involved, it becomes very difficult because not only do you have to give attention to your children, but you also have to be very clear about what work you need to do during the day with meetings. And everybody on here knows that every Zoom meeting nowadays goes over at least a half an hour or goes under a half an hour. But for the most part, at the end of the day, you've been through 6 of them and it all evens out at it. So like when we're talking about this reality, it's like very hard to pay attention. So like for me, that's like paddling water. And so like number one, we have to be honest, right? We have to reevaluate the fact how we even look at what students will be admitted into special select schools in high school next year, right? We're talking about 2 years of instruction that is kind of like, you know, plausible deniability, didn't really learn nothing, right? And so like when we're talking about standardized testing, when we're talking about even the ratings given to schools and the ratings given to teachers under PBOS, I mean, like all that stuff needs to go back to the drawing table at this point. And I'm sorry, we have to be honest, be like what we're doing and what we have been doing up to this point is not working. So like, what can we learn from this experience doing it virtually that we can integrate in? But also, how can we within the school be much more accountable, especially associated with the uprisings that are happening at the same time? And I think like if all these conversations happen in that way, if folks are being honest about it, I think some real work can be done around education, public, charter, and private across the board. Because no longer can we turn a blind eye to the fact that it ain't working. What measures of success that we have is not working. And since we're at the point where we can hit the reset button and reevaluate, I say we do, and folks in the education world should be advocating for such. Because if not, you're cutting your nose off to spite your face. So
I hear you.
All
I hear
that
you.
for sure. All that.
What say you, PK?
So first of all, I just want to give a big shout out to the two of you who are, in the business of teaching kids and educating them. It's a full-time business. It's no joke. I know that, especially since I've been working from home since at the middle of March or so, I believe, Alex. Yeah. So honestly, I'm going to be very frank here. Sometimes I feel like working from home is not for me. You know why? Because I get fatigued with seeing my kids around and everything. So at the end of the day, I just want to go out, breathe in some fresh air, just drive around a little bit. I know my wife's going to kill me because, truth be told, I've lied some nights that I just needed to give this letter to somebody else. All I needed to do was just go out to, just have a little me time, So I'm saying this to say that I appreciate the work that teachers do, and I love the fact that kids can be in school. It saves me lunch money. It saves me a whole lot of other the economics. So I definitely will wish that my kids would be in school, and they wouldn't have to. I don't have to choose between virtual schooling and conventional or traditional schooling. This is a very challenging times. That's all I can say, and it's pretty difficult trying to maintain sanity between family and even the way you look at your kids, because it's tough. That's all I can say. I don't know if it makes sense.
Yeah, I can only imagine what you guys go through. I live by myself, so I go on the flip of it. Like, I mean, I go days without interacting with another human being. And so, like, for me, it's just like I'm used to going to events and happy hours, and I was supposed to be traveling this year, and it just didn't quite work out. And so it's just like, you know, I on the flip side, I mean, I can't imagine. I mean, sometimes I wish I had a kid running around here, but then, I mean, I probably would go crazy. So how about you, Sterling? Like, what say you, man? How are you keeping your mental health up? What are you doing to keep it up and so you can keep doing the good work? Yeah, I think you're muted.
If I unmuted, right?
Yeah.
I always get that. At least like once a day it happens. So I think for me, mental health really came down to nutrition, number one, which was a battle for myself. Anyone who knows me well knows I'm a terrible sleeper. Like, I do not sleep through the night. You might as well sit me next to your newborn. And so for me, the balance was like, if I'm never going to sleep well, which we know has health implications long term, I need to eat well. So I really started to shift my diet and really get into infusing more plant-based meals into my diet, which has been really fun as somebody who enjoys cooking, to kind of play with new recipes. So that's been a sort of space that I've really tried to hold. I'm trying to get out and move a bit more. I've gone on a couple of hikes, so I'm encouraging anybody who loves me to just like drag me out in the mornings before I start work and make me go. I'm down for it. And also finding ways to maintain the communities that have already existed for me in the safe and smart ways that we know we need to. So the virtual happy hours and the hangouts and the group chats, I've really invested in making sure that I am intentional about those spaces. But also the random ones. I think those have been most impactful for me. Like, when somebody crosses my mind, I take the 5 seconds to be like, yo, you crossed my mind. And that's important to kind of maintain, particularly in this space where we don't have the ability to build that in-person community. And if I could quickly, to PK's earlier points, I think he made such a poignant remark when he said the business of schools, because as much as we like to think otherwise, schools are absolutely businesses. I think that gives us a great argument for how to renegotiate some of the terms that we have existing with the other sectors that we consistently interact with: philanthropy, nonprofits, business, technology. We're sitting in Philadelphia with Comcast as a hub. There is no reason why we should have any kind of problem with hotspots, with technology, with laptop distribution, but that is a function of the school district, the city council, the business leaders themselves, and the way that they are unable to negotiate some of these spaces. And I'm not going to lay blame at any one organization or entity's feet, because this is a collective problem. But I think it sort of underscores the necessity for all of us to recognize that society has consistently operated. And going back to, I think, what you read about Ismael's bio and the lessons we've learned from Paulo Freire and Pedagogy of the Oppressed, like, this is a consistent operation that we have seen over time, and the system is working exactly as it was designed to. It's now our turn to renegotiate that system and to say that this is not working for us. And if we're really going to seek equity, and if we really care about Black Lives Mattering, it's got to be more than us posting a nice little picture on Instagram or our little black square on a Tuesday because somebody told us that that was the thing. And it's got to be about us specifically putting in place interventions that ensure that our most vulnerable communities are receiving the supports they need, that our resources are allocated in a way that support the outcomes that we say we care about. So how do we make sure, again, that we are balancing health and safety for our students, for our families, giving them the agency that they need to make decisions that are right for them? And I'm not a parent. I have a ton of students who are my children for sure, but I have no legal progeny of my own. And so I will 100% defer to students and parents and families in advocating for what they need most. I think that is 100% the bedrock of what a good society should be about. But we need to, again, rethink about our resource allocation. Mental health supports, mental wellness supports should not be things that are only for the privileged who have disposable income. These should be a part of the healthcare that we provide to every citizen as a part of you being in our society. And so we can see sort of at the highest levels how these problems sort of trickle down and create everyday challenges that our parents and families have to now navigate. And so, as we've mentioned a number of times, this is not going to be an easy situation for us to figure out, but I am 100% in favor of us staying flexible and recognizing that what works for one family is not going to work for another, and that it's going to require us to continue to provide our resources for those who are on the front lines most. Schools to be able to be responsive to what their staff needs in terms of managing home and their student loads. Families themselves being able to figure out how to navigate digital learning, this hybrid model, and what it means to be in person for families who might need the unfortunate space that schools provide as a childcare provider for them to, in order to like stay employed, stay able to providing for their families. So yes, at the end of the day, it's really got to be us staying flexible and recognizing that this thing's going to look a number of different ways for us to be what we can think of as successful in the short term.
So, I mean, I just want to hit on this last thing because you guys have kind of been tapping on it, and I was just like, okay, well, and I know they're going to ask. So, Black Lives Matter. I know that teachers use moments in history to be able to use them as teachable moments for the students, right? Using current events and issues helps us make things more clearer to students because they're able to connect those dots. How have you been, how has Black Lives Matter, this movement this time influenced the way that you have tried to engage your students? And what types of conversations have you been having with your students about what's happening out there? And how are you engaging them as far as how people are describing it as riots or as rebellions? Like, how are you communicating and discussing these things with your students and PK with your children? How are you addressing these issues? And so I will start with, I can start with you, Sterling. We can hit you back again. How are you addressing these with the people that you work with at your job? And how is it influencing what you're doing forward?
This has been an incredible time, honestly, to be a part of as a citizen of the world and as a Black individual. I remember the stories that my elders would tell about, you know, the March on Washington and seeing a transition into the 70s and 80s and this sort of new wave of Black success that was bought on the backs of our elders and ancestors who literally fought tooth and nail for the rights that we see today. I think this new wave and the next part of the conversation, because this is one long going thread if we're really looking at history in the ways I think we should, I think is really speaking to the next level of liberation that we need for particularly Black Americans, but for all oppressed minorities, oppressed individuals, I shouldn't say minorities, to be quite honest. And so I think there is a conversation that I'm excited to continue having with my students that I engage with every day and with my community members about what liberation truly looks like for us. For the white dominant culture, liberation has always been the norm, and people have been allowed to freely exist in multitudes of ways around different lines of identity, whereas Black individuals in particular have specifically been restricted and oppressed to maintain very specific boxes that they were allowed to be in. And so I'm excited to see this new wave where Black liberation looks like Black liberation along lines of gender and sexuality and income and education and mobility and healthcare and access to opportunities and resources. These are all issues that have been longstanding, and I'm excited to see different voices, young voices especially, who are leading these efforts to say that if we are really going to value these lives and really talk about the land of the free and the home of the brave, let's ensure freedom. Let's be brave. Let's do the hard, difficult thing that we require in order to see a society that is truly just. And so my conversations are really influenced by the people every day that experience this most, which for me is my students. And so I'm loving seeing them grapple with these different questions about what they see every day in schools, which we know have been some of the most oppressive places for our kids in the history of the universe. And so I'm really excited for us to continue having these conversations and for me to listen and figure out what can I do as an adult with a level of agency that they don't always see, with a network that they, in many cases, have yet to build to figure out how we leverage resources in the right way. Again, this is all about reimagining and saying things are not going to look the way that they did before, and they can't if we are really committed to true equity and social justice. And that's got to be a drum that we continue to beat every day, an activism that we continue to live out in every single facet of our lives. This can't just be in the conversation about reopening schools. It's got to be about what's happening in boardrooms. It's got to be about the real diversity and equity conversations that isn't just let's hire a diversity officer, give them some project to work on, and then ignore what they say for the rest of the year, which I've seen happen in my own work experience multiple times. This has got to be about what we do in medicine. This has got to be about what we do about climate. And so if we're having this conversation, which we are, like, let's be all in, continue beating that drum, because this isn't over. This is not something that's gone away because the mass media have stopped covering it. We absolutely see the injustices that are happening in Portland. If you are looking at that kind of situation, it should be absolutely mind-boggling and infuriating that in the freest nation on the world, on the face of the earth, that people are literally being like rounded up and like disappeared. And this is not a new story. So let's continue to leverage the resources we have. Let's continue to speak to those who are in positions of power and influence to ensure that we are holding them accountable. And if they are not, let's use the mechanisms that we currently have, and let's move on and find people who are absolutely doing that. We are seeing a new progressive wave of individuals along a number of lines of identity who are stepping up and saying, we have a new vision for the way our society can operate. And it can absolutely speak to the least of these, and stop letting those with the most access and the most resources and the most money continue calling the shots to continue to hoard those resources. I don't know anybody on the face of the earth that's going to blow through $17 billion and like feel poor at the end of the day. Like, the fact that that exists and that we are okay with that existing as a society is, I think, one of the biggest plagues on us. So I am excited to continue figuring out ways that I can use my own particular brand of activism, which I think comes through classrooms and through education, but for all individuals to find the way that their voice matters in this larger conversation.
So I'm going to do this, okay? Because I mean, one, I want to ask you guys. I mean, I know this is actually, people are starting to toss questions in the chat, but I do want to definitely, because I know Ishmael wants to talk about Black Lives Matter space, because he was kind of hitting that, and that's kind of his thing, and I am all for it. I love it, Black Power, and I would love to hear PK's position on it, especially PK coming here and seeing this happening all around him. And so I want to kind of ask you, because this is a really good question, and I'm curious about this too, because I think this goes with the whole equity of learning thing. And I'm curious to hear what your answer is going to be, because Toya is asking about virtual schooling and how the teachers are helping parents navigate these technologies, and how the teachers are navigating it too, and what types of processes you're going through to learn it. But I do want to give you a chance to hit on Black Lives Matter. So I'm going to say this to you. If we go a little bit over, is that okay with you guys? Yes, no, I know that you all are obligated to do other things. Is it all right? Just give me a thumbs up, PK, if it's cool. All right, cool. All right, so give me a spiel about Black Lives Matter, because it is influencing what you're doing. And then I also want to know what type of professional development you're going through to learn how to use these platforms. And PK, I want to know how the teachers are supporting you and helping you help your children navigate these things, okay? Because I think this is a really important thing. And this is where we're talking about equity of learning. Because I'm learning that some students who were doing bad in school are actually excelling in this space. And then we're seeing that on the other side, vice versa, some kids who were doing very well in school are now doing bad because they're now being exposed to issues outside of the school. So can you walk me through what type of professional development you're going through to help training on the virtual schooling, and then also give me a little bit on the Black Lives Matter. You got some good stuff that you want to tell me, and I'm ready to be excited. All right, go ahead. Ishmael.
Yeah, that's me, right? So I've been organizing with Black Lives Matter Philly for the last 3 years, and Black Lives Matter Philly is part of the National Black Lives Matter Network, and they have been doing great work around education, like around incentivizing Black educators to stay by offering them a grant around a project around something around Black Lives Matter and things like that. So the work was already being done. And in 2017, Philadelphia, I was one of the core organizers that started Black Lives Matter in School, which was a full week. Last year, the third year it went national, was in over 30 different cities across the country at the same time. And so this whole point of elevating Black lives, I'm one of those people, right, who believe that if you can't admit or acknowledge that Black people were never meant to be free in American society, you probably hold anti-Black views regardless of your racial identity or who you think you are, right? Because those are the type of ideas and concepts that we're indoctrinated with from a young age. So me as an educator and being involved in these like activist movements along with Black Lives Matter Philly is directly connected, not only as my responsibility in teaching in a hyperly segregated school, which is like 95% Black and brown students in high poverty, but also my responsibility as a human being that's aware of the circumstances that are happening right now. And I think all those type of things are considerations that need to be taken into account when we think about how we orient ourselves in our society. I'm one of those advocates that say that we've not been going the right way, right? Like, what is the right way in a society? Like, what year did Black people get free? One of the questions I ask my students, or what year did Martin Luther King get killed? Like, most people think right after the I Have a Dream speech and leave out the fact that he was against war and was advocating a poor people's campaign, right? And that's really why he got shot, right? Similar position that Malcolm had 3 years prior when he was assassinated. So as a student of history and as a history teacher, I look at these, and so Black Lives Matter appealed to me from the beginning because I could tell that it was part of a new articulation of resisting kind of narratives of the dominant group within our society. Because not only is anti-Black racism very problematic and very detrimental and internalized racism, but also how white supremacy functions, right? And how it's resilient and it perpetuates itself through the kind of assumptions in which it claims and which it represents. So like when we're talking about all this, it's hard to navigate that situation if you're not provided that context or some of that conceptualization. And so the only real thing I think is practice, right? There's a Stick Man from Dead Prez has a quote in the song. He's like, it's theory, practice, theory. Wisdom is organically grown. It's not prepackaged, right? So you have to not only develop your theory, you have to go out in the world and practice it and then come back to the drawing board and fix what you're looking at in order to go back into the world and practice it again. And I think we fail to recognize that when we talk about education, when we talk about activism, when we talk about even just our daily lives on the grind, going through the day-to-day struggle. So all those things combined, I think is very important. And I also just want to shout out the Racial Justice Organizing Committee that last Sunday had a successful educator and student march for Black Lives, where we had 3 school board members come out on their own. Amin Akbar, MacGyver, and Felix Lopez. I just got to shout them out. Kendra Brooks was also out there, and also Sharice Street. So I definitely got to veggie back off of what Sterling was saying earlier about some of this is changing. There is a tide shift of folks who are willing to really take the risk to stand up for what's right and not what's politics. And I think that we're going to continue seeing this as things go on, because once folks see other people doing it, man, it just inspires folks. And you can't stop that once it hits a certain level. And I'm hopeful that we're almost at that point.
Okay. All right. So now families need training on virtual schooling. So what processes are you going through to get to that? It's okay. It's all right. I know we're passionate about that stuff, right?
Yeah.
You're
glad. No. I'm actually starting something called the Philly Hub of Liberatory Academics with a couple other educators. You can go check us out. It's phlaed.org. And right when COVID hit and the pandemic hit, we recognized the school district wasn't doing nothing, and that we need to get educators who have kind of the similar radical pedagogy and the orientation towards that to be willing to kind of put resources in one place. So it was inspired mostly by Keziah Ridgway, who's a great African-American history teacher at Northeast High School, and how she had virtual lessons for anybody in the city, 11 o'clock every day as soon as school closed. And we were thinking, okay, how about putting that in one place? So that thinking's already there. But I also want to emphasize, like, teachers actually have to go out their way to get adequate training. The school district is offering like the tools of it, but they're not actually showing you how to scaffold it appropriately. So I can tell you right now, it's going to be incumbent on folks, teachers on their own initiative who know what they're doing to teach other teachers. And, you know, with that knowledge in mind, some of us have taken that initiative, and I know that we're not the only ones thinking of this. I know the Black Male Center, Educator Development Center is also thinking along those lines, and Freedom Schools and the Abolitionist Teaching Center by Bettina Love. So you just see these iterations happening across the country at the same time.
Wow. Yeah. So you guys are going to technically having to self-teach yourself how to use this platform to keep the attention of students who are now trying to learn in a completely different way. That sounds like a bunch of mess. PK, how has the online learning been for your students and for your kids, and have you had to learn how to use the platform? Has it been easy for you to navigate, or how have you been navigating that process with your kids?
Okay, so this is where I fall short. I think that I'm challenged when it comes to that because my wife has done the most of that part of that job. Yeah, but I feel like everything is going virtually great. I have this feeling that he's and you see the thing is if you make them disciplined enough to be online at this time every day and draw like a timetable for them, they tend to follow through with it. I'm not particularly involved in the processes of or how the whole learning procedure is undertaken, but I can only talk about what I see him do every day. Uh, uh, yeah, so my judgment will be that it's something that should be continued instead of trying to get them as fast as possible back into the classrooms where it's not going to be safe, even though they are not uh, uh, particularly susceptible to COVID-19. But if you permit me, I just want to say something very briefly about Black Lives Matter
Oh, yeah,
and
go ahead.
yeah, so as a person coming from a country that supposedly contributed the most slaves to the West, uh, I have been emotional since I've been in this country, and this moment right here, right now, it's like it's the one that broke the camel's back for me, if, for lack of a better expression. Uh, it, it's um, it's tough to see people that look like me having gone through uh, uh, something as I don't have the right words to describe it, but I sympathize with yourselves having enjoyed this whole culture and way of living for this significant period of time. I think that no human being should be able to, or under no circumstance should anybody to live under these types of conditions. The privileges that um, other demographics have, it's just mind-boggling. I'll make an I'll tell you this story. So my son has to do the IEP, and I'm sure you both know what that is. He's brilliant. He is honestly, I don't see anything wrong with him intellectually and everything. But we're in the Lower Marion district, right? So it turns out that this is not something that is new to my kid. It's something that black kids in that school have been going through. I don't care if I get into trouble for saying this. I feel it's not right. It can be justified, and it's totally discriminatory how you box, certain type of kids in a corner and label them and let them require special education when they actually don't need it. Uh, it does a whole lot to your psyche and your development as a kid. I think that it's not the best of things to do to these children. And the inequality in this country, as I've come to know it, is just mind boggling. It's just, I mean, I grew up in modern day Ghana. We had our own form of suppression and subjugation. That was colonialism. But we found a way around it. I wouldn't say we were able to entirely overcome it, but this takes it up a notch. That's all I can. Yeah.
I hear you. I mean, I actually wasn't. I had an IEP when I was growing up. I was in special ed math myself, oddly enough. And so, I mean, yeah, a lot of children are misdiagnosed. Um, uh, but sometimes it takes a lot of advocating for the parents to try to change that. Um, yeah, and it can be a really difficult process to navigate. Um, so I want to do this. I want to give you guys a chance to close out with something that you want to tell everybody, and then also give them a chance to let them know how they can find you online if they want to connect or follow you. So this is your moment to leave a good word with the audience. I will say this is one of the most watched videos that I've had. So I'm not sure if it's your guys' star power or the fact that you guys are absolutely brilliant, because all those things are definitely true. But I want to say that you guys have amazed me tonight, and you have helped. It gave me a clout. So yeah, you guys are great. So thank you so much, and I'm sure that this will be watched a lot because I've never had this much of a consistent audience at one time. So you guys have been talking good, and you've kept people's attention. So I will say that about you. So if you guys could leave the audience with a good word, do that and let them know how they can contact you so they can watch you guys in your careers. All right, and we can start with Sterling.
Great. Thank you again, all of you, for engaging in this conversation. I appreciate the opportunity to speak and to think about these issues from a number of different perspectives, which I think is the best way to engage information. As I've heard this conversation tonight and the points that both Ismael and PK made from their perspectives, I was struck by the idea that this time is really about individuals and the fact that we are now allowed to exercise our voices and our activism in a way that has not traditionally been the case and not been really heard in real ways. If I look at my own social media, I'm consistently seeing stories of individuals who stepped in when they saw something wrong in a situation, who stepped in and continue to push for change, to ask their policymakers to adjust the way that they were operating. And we saw things shift in different locales because of that individual action. And so my push would be for all of us, and this is a commitment I need to make for myself as well, is to think about the spaces where I could continue to speak up, where I could continue to use my voice and put my perspective into the conversation. Because as I've grown over the last couple of years, particularly since leaving the classroom and being in a number of these spaces, because I've sat in board meetings, I've sat with colleges of education, I've sat with the decision makers at the Department of Education at the Commonwealth who are thinking about and trying to make these decisions. And the vast majority of those rooms do not have individuals who look like us. They definitely do not have individuals who live like us. And so those perspectives and those real lived experiences are often left out of the narrative that is used to make decisions. So continue to use your voice, find those spaces, blow up those email accounts. I promise you, after a while, somebody's going to start getting annoyed and going to figure out I need to do something different in order to make somebody like see that the changes are happening the way that the community need them to. And so that would be my biggest push. Like, let's all figure out the ways that we can use our voices. I think right now we are seeing that momentum that Ismael mentioned starting to take shape. And if we can continue to do that on all of these fronts, like that ball is only going to continue rolling down the hill. And so I'm excited to see where this leads us. I'm, I guess, lucky enough that at this point you can Google me a little bit and find me. Generally, I guess the fastest way now is Instagram. That's what the kids are using. And I'm not a TikToker yet, so I'm just gonna let that one go. But you can find me on Instagram at SterlyG, STERLYG. I'm happy to connect with you there. Start email, phone conversations, whatever is helpful.
Okay, thank you, Sterling. You can go, PK. What would you like to leave with our audience, and how can they find you on social media?
So my whole motivation ever since I've been here in this country has been to contribute the littlest that I can to empower Black people, and I'm glad that you're giving me this outlet, Alex, to talk about this, because I don't know where else I can vent like this. Maybe not vent, but. So I'm happy, especially and most particularly for the work that I'm doing with Senior Law Center, and the fact that we are helping low-incomers, obviously, at least one direction, Black people, and especially with the projects that I'm involved in, which is housing. I intend to do more advocacy, and this is actually something that I've been contemplating since I went on a short leave, Alex. Particularly, I want you to listen to this. So I've been researching how best senior law, for example, can leverage the huge goodwill that they have to embark on meaningful civil Black community advocacy activities. I feel that there's been too much concentration on criminal reform and criminal justice and criminal law, too much to the neglect of civil advocacy and civil legal assistance. I feel that this is about time that Black people, especially, are made aware of their civil rights in housing, in education, every aspect of their civil life. I feel that there should be a systemic and holistic approach to going about civil advocacy in especially Black communities to see what happens from there. Because my research came up that a very shocking percentage of blacks actually know that there's a difference between civil law and criminal law. So people have so much distrust in the criminal law system that they don't think that the civil law courts will be able to do them any good. So this is something that I feel as Alex, somebody that occupies a very significant position in senior law center and in Philadelphia as a whole. I feel it's something that we should take up and run with. Civil legal advocacy and civil legal assistance. That's just what I want to say and what I want to use this outlet to do.
Okay. All right. And so, how could they contact you on social media, man?
Oh, it's PK Dickson on Facebook. I don't do TikTok also like Sterling. And yeah, it's PK Dickson everywhere, Instagram and Facebook. That's where I think I'm most active.
What's your handle? What's your handle on Instagram?
Instagram is PK Dickson. Oh,
Okay.
yeah, I think so. Well, when I get to the point when I can be Googled, I can
You on your way, brother. You on your way.
You actually can be Google, PK.
Yeah.
You can. Yeah. All right. Thank you, sir. And Ishmael.
Yeah, I just wanted to just end actually with a quote by Martin King, right, towards the end of his life. And he warned folks, right? He warned America where they were at and what was happening. And he's, quote unquote, if we do not act, shall surely be dragged down the long, dark, and shameful corridors of time, reserved for those who possess power without compassion, might without morality, and strength without sight. And Martin King got shot a year after he said that, right? And we have to be honest about the situation that we're at. We don't have the solutions. We don't have the right answers. As much as this complex issue is on us, there's so many other complex underlying issues that this is even showing the rest of the public, but a lot of folks already know, right? And I want folks to operate from that position, because only then can we move forward instead of always kind of like trying and not learning from the past, right? There's no coincidence that we're having uprisings for the same reasons uprisings happened 40 years ago, right? The same reason uprisings happened 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years ago. And with all those things happening while at the same time having a pandemic that's unprecedented, and kind of like the past laying in shallow graves slowly coming out to light, right? What was done in the dark shall come to light, that type of thing. We're just in a unique circumstance that we really need to just control that narrative. Paulo Freire said once that language is never neutral, right? So what language, what definitions are we applying to our lives and the direction that we want to have, right? And that's the only way we can actually embrace Kujichagulia, or self-determination, right? To be able to define the world on our terms in order to actually move in a direction that is different than the direction that it's going now. Because it ain't all good. And unfortunately, if our kids aren't being taught how to turn it around, we will be walking off a cliff one day saying, oh, what happened? There's nothing we can do about it now. I wish I could have done something in the past, right? And Martin King was warning us. Folks after him was warning us. We're warning us, right? And at some point, it's like there's no more time for, moderation in the sense of waiting for things to change. Tranquility in the status quo is no longer acceptable, and no longer should we wait for folks to get comfortable in order to move out of that direction. So with all that being said, I've just said that we got to go heavy. We got to go hard. There's no excuses. This is game time. This is stuff that organizers dream about, in the sense of mobilizing people and actually putting them towards something that is righteous. So I know everybody up in this call is about that life. So
you're so black. I love it. I love it. I love it, man. I do appreciate that. Yes, guys, it has been my absolute greatest pleasure today to have you guys sit here and talk to you. You guys are absolutely amazing and brilliant, and I am humbled to share this space with you guys. So thank you so much for saying yes last minute. As everything started, like, let me tell you something. Everything just fell apart like randomly. Like all the guests that I had was just like, no, I can't do it. I'm just like, so like yesterday I was like scrambling, trying to figure out who I can try last minute. And you guys all just happily and willingly was like, yeah, I would love to do it, and engaged me. And thank you so much. And some of you I haven't even talked to. Well, I just talked to Kay, we work together. I haven't talked to Ishmael since. I mean, I was trying to get the endorsement. So like that was like 2018. So like, yeah, it's been a while, and I've been watching you, Sterling, for a long time, since before your hair was gold. So you know, I mean, it's just great to actually share this space with you. So I'm gonna let you guys go. Thank y'all so much. I'm gonna go ahead and say my little rant piece at the end and wrap this thing up. And thank you so much. All right. So I'm gonna meet you guys. And all right. So wow. Education is really important. It is the great equalizer, right? We hope that if our children get good educations, that they'll be able to use that education and excel farther than we have, because that's the hope of every parent, right? That their children do better than they do, right? That they work hard so their children can experience the wealth of the hard work that they did. And so when we get into situations like this, and we start to see situations like this kind of exasperate disparities and break up the good work that we have worked for in our lives, it can kind of be devastating. I'm just going to say this. This is just a season, and this too will pass. And all the work that you're doing to take care of your families, to keep putting food on the table, to educate your children in your homes, to maintain your friendships outside. I mean, if you just hold on, this is going to pass just like everything else passed. And we're going to come out on the other side. We're going to come out better. I'm thankful that you're watching and taking the time to watch my show. This has been a great pleasure to meet up with my friends and have discussions with them. Won't you go ahead, if you haven't, go to JAY8390 on YouTube and subscribe to my channel so you can get the updates of when these shows happen. Check me out next week. We'll do another great topic. If you have any suggestions on topics that we can make or talk about, feel free to shoot me an email. Shoot me at jay8390@gmail.com, or you can send me a DM on Facebook. I'm Alex Deering, of course. I have a like page, and I have this page if you're on this one. You can also go see me on Instagram. I'm at j.alex.deering. Follow me, check me out, talk to me, ask me questions. If you want to be a guest on the show, if you have a topic that you feel like you'll be able to talk about, shoot me an email. We'll definitely bring you on. I know one of my mentors, he's out in California. He wants to bring together activists in California and have conversations with them. And so we can talk about what's going on the West Coast and not just on the East Coast. Any topic that you want to talk about, just let me know. Any comments or questions, you can definitely shoot them. Connect with people that have been on the show. Stay safe, keep your mental health going. Thank you for watching. Hit me up, and I'll see you next week at 8 p.m. Talks with Alex. All right.